Eat, sleep, bet, repeat. That's how we get down here on the opening line at EliteSportsBetting.com. I'm your host, Benny Ricciardi, and today we're going to be looking at some late in the week NFL lines. With me today, I bring in my man, Austin. And before we came on the show, we were actually talking. This is one of the worst weeks I've seen in terms of Vegas's opening lines and where the lines are a couple days after they opened at this point. We have 11 of the 16 games. There's no buys anymore, so we have all 16 games going on this weekend. 11 of these 16 games have moved by at least 1.5 already. And I don't ever remember that many lines being off from Vegas. Now, again, some of them only moved 1.5. Some of these other ones have moved, from a pick'em to a -3 or from a -3 in the other direction back to a pick'em, which when we start talking about some of the key numbers are pretty big moves. Why do you think that might be this year? Because I don't ever remember that many lines moving that much in such a short period of time.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to say. The biggest thing that, I point to is probably the injury reports. Early in the week, you don't get any information on who's playing. 15 guys might end up on the injury report, and the games. Everybody's bigger and faster now. Injuries are more common. Teams are using analytics to know that practicing less is helping more. But you got to put them on the injury report if they don't practice. So I think that's probably the biggest factor is, you're guessing early in the week if you're trying to get down early. If you're waiting, like you said, a lot of the lines have moved a considerable amount. You might get left behind if you're waiting until Friday, to place your bets after Friday's practice.
Yeah, and again, we talk about it all the time that the NFL is the biggest market and the most efficient market. And what we mean by that is, by the end of the week, there's been so much money that's put on one way or another that's, been what's moving these lines in one direction or the other. By the time Thursday, Friday rolls around, you don't see as much late in the week movement unless we get somebody who, all of a sudden pops up on the injury report that we weren't expecting.
Yep.
Normally, you don't get as much line movement later on in the week on Thursday, Friday. So obviously, that's why we want to try to get down our money as early as possible. That's why we do the show on Monday with Paulie talking NFL, and that's why we have you in on Thursday. So, by now we can kind of see what's going to happen. We kind of know who's going to be in, who's going to be out. And, now we have some lines and some numbers that we can actually go with. So that's what the exercise that we like to talk about here today is. You put together your own numbers, you walk through everything. Go ahead and tell me some of the things that are standing out to you based on, the numbers that you have and, the numbers that Vegas is now offering us.
I guess it kind of ties in. The biggest thing for me right now is the injuries. That's pretty much everything that if I get if you give me everybody who's playing on Monday, and you give everybody that, the market's going to be pretty tight early on. So you kind of have to do some guesswork. I think that's the biggest challenge right now is you're spending a lot of time looking at, injury reports. You're checking out beat writers on Twitter. You're looking, this guy didn't practice on Tuesday, but he's limited on Wednesday. So, things are looking up. So that's a lot of guesswork, definitely because so many guys are out now. Like if you have 3 guys on the offensive line that are out, that's a pretty considerable amount, more so than if it's just one. So it's those things. You got to look for cluster injuries. Obviously, the quarterback position is what it is. That's obviously a huge thing. But secondary industries, it's a lot of patchwork. That's probably the hardest thing going on right now for me, at least.
Yeah, no, I mean, absolutely. I mean, we look, like I said, we look at the games this week. 11 of the 16 lines, Vegas had to move one way or another.
Yeah.
I mean, normally in a week, you'll see maybe 3 or 4 of the move, and a lot of them are maybe a point here, a point there. Maybe there's one line that moves 2 or 3 points. There are at least 3 lines this week that moved 3 points. Like I said, 2 of them that moved. Tennessee, Oakland went from a pick'em to -3 Tennessee. Seattle started out as a 3-point favorite and went down to a pick'em. And those are key numbers. Like those are, it's one thing to move from 1 to 2. It's another thing when you're moving off of or onto a key number. I mean, even, the Baltimore game opened at 7.5 and went down to 5.5, came through the 7 there. So there's a lot of middles that we're going to be able to get this week if you got down in your money early.
Yeah.
And like you said, some of these lines might not even be done moving because we're doing this Thursday morning. So really the only normal day of practice for NFL teams that we've had so far has been Wednesday. Thursday and Friday are the injury reports, for fantasy, for sports betting, where you really start getting a clearer picture of who's going to play and who's not going to play. Yep. But with all that in mind, is there anything that is standing out to you as, some places you think we should be getting down?
Yeah. First, I'll start with it's ugly, but Carolina. The line has moved. This is one that's significant. It's gone -1 to -3. I don't think Atlanta's that good. I did get on them last week they played Thanksgiving night, and they got 3 onside kicks in a row and couldn't find a way to cover for me. So,
yep.
Atlanta had those. I think they beat the Saints, a couple weeks ago, and then they came back and beat someone next week too. People were kind of saying, Dan Quinn saved his job, and this team's turning around. I still don't think they're that good. Carolina's been brutal, and Cam Newton's still not playing, so we're riding here. But I just think you can get +3 for pretty low juice right now. -104 is out there, so I think that's a pretty good play this week, and I think you're getting pretty good value there.
Yeah, Atlanta's one of those teams that they have the talent to play with anybody, but so far this year, they just every game there seems to be something wrong, and I think it has a lot to do with the defense. I mean, that defense has put them in bad spots in first halves quite often where they've been down, 2 touchdowns or more. And then, for fantasy, it's been good for us because you get the Matt Ryan 300 yards in the second half because he's got to sling it 40 times.
Yeah.
And it's been able to get there. But, yeah, I mean, when you're talking about, teams that have really underperformed this year, especially against the spread, Atlanta has been one of those teams that, Vegas and the public as a whole seems to be overvaluing, pretty much on a weekly basis right now.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk to you about some of these line moves and see if there's anything that, that you have. So let's just go through some of these games right now.
Okay.
Like I said, Baltimore started as a 7.5-point favorite, went through the 7 down to 5.5. Anything on that you're looking at?
I had nothing there. If early in the week, I would have said to play on Buffalo. I did not get a piece of it, but at 6, 6 or 5.5 is what we're seeing now. If you have to play 6, Buffalo's there's probably a little bit of value there. 5.5, no. Once you come off a 6, you're really not getting much of anything. 5 and 5.5 is not significant in today's NFL. It's a little bit more with the extra points being, and the kicking this year has been horrendous. I don't know what's I don't know what's going on, but nobody like short field goals. Like I get not 45 plus are tough, but kicks under 40 I feel like are just shanked every week. It's insane. So if anything, Buffalo at 6 for me would be the play there. But once it gets under 6, I wouldn't be touching it.
So here's another line that I wanted to talk to you about: the Denver-Houston game, right? Mm-hmm. So Houston started out as a 7.5-point favorite. Now they're up to a 9.5-point favorite. For the most part, now 8 is a little bit more, and we could have this argument another time because this is a much longer discussion. Yeah. But I feel like 8's a little bit more of a key number now with teams going for 2 more often, and like you mentioned, all the troubles teams have just making extra points nowadays.
Yeah.
But the line movement from 7.5 down to 5.5 versus the line movement from 7.5 up to 9.5. To me, I'm more apt to still stay on a team like Houston going from 7.5 to 9.5 because you're still staying under that 10, which is really kind of you didn't really cross any major key numbers there, as opposed to a game like Baltimore and Buffalo going 7.5 to 5.5, or the Jets and Miami, which went from 7.5 to 5.5. How do you handle those situations? Are you more likely to stay away from places where it crosses a key number, or is that not as big a deal anymore?
It's dependent. Once you're above 7, it's not that big of a deal for me. A lot of times there's not huge edges once you get that high. Right. The Houston game's up to 9.5 now. I think that's probably a little too high. I make it just under 9. Okay. So the movement off of 7.5, wherever it opened, was agreed with me, but like 7.5 to just under, like I had it just under 9. That's not that big of an edge. It's a little bit, but like you said, the 8 is more key now than say 5 years ago, but it's still not that key. If it's the key number that I'm probably shooting for would be 7 and 3, just because they're the most important, obviously. And I'd say most often 3, because this league is just every game. I feel like every game's coming down. Like, you're watching the games 1:00, on Sunday, and like at 4:00, you're just pulling your hair out because every game's like you're sweating. Like it's incredible. Every week, the witching hour or whatever you want to call it, like that last 30 minutes, you're sweating. So, the key numbers definitely in the close games are really valuable to me.
Yeah, and again, we talk about the efficient lines. That's one of the reasons why I used to be a huge fan of the teasers, because a lot of times the teasers hitting on both sides because these lines are very accurate in the NFL. Although I have to say, teaser strategies have not been working out as well this year as they normally do. I mean, I'm a firm believer in the whole Stanford Wong theory where, if you can take some of these home dogs and get them up through the 3 and the 7, or, take some of these, teams that are up at like 8 and get them down, through the 7 and the 3 down to the 3. I mean, these things used to hit 60, 70%. Like, it was almost a lock. You were just printing money on it.
Yeah.
This year, I got to check the numbers on it because I do them quite often. And I feel like this year it has not worked out as well with,
I do a couple of those from time to time as well. And I haven't noticed either way. So they definitely haven't been good. Because if they were good or really bad, I'd remember. But I don't go too much, but like you said, getting through the 3 and 7 is definitely the way to go there.
Yeah, I feel like they're still hitting at like a decent enough clip where you're making, you're making your money back. But this used to be a money making strategy. Like this used to be something where, you were hitting 3 or 4 of them, every other week. And and now I feel like it's more like a 50-50 thing where if you put a couple of them in, you're kind of breaking even on it. So, that's one of those things. So let me ask you a couple other games that I want to talk about real quick here. The ones that we talked about where it went from like a pick 'em to -3, because to me, those are always significant moves when you can get up to that. So we had Pittsburgh against Arizona start out as a pick 'em and go to -3. We had Tennessee against Oakland start out as a pick 'em and go to -3. And then we had Seattle and the Rams start out at -3 and get dropped down to a pick 'em.
Yeah.
How do you handle games like that when you see them? I mean, take them individually or as a whole if you want.
I mean, it goes, obviously you start with what your number says. And then, if you're getting down on Monday or Tuesday, whatever you are, you just see where it is. And, like if you see Pittsburgh's moving up, Pittsburgh's probably a team that I think, you in Arizona, just because they got smoked last week against the Rams and everybody's been down on the Rams. So, you might get a little bit of an inflated spot with Pittsburgh here. Everybody, Duck Hodges he played all right last week, but, I think people might be like, oh, this is the next guy. Like, let's get excited about this next new quarterback. Kyle Allen for the Panthers was that like 2 months ago, and now they're horrible.
Yeah, three interceptions a game, and now he's calling games instead of winning them.
You get a little bit. Tennessee's the same thing. They bench Mariota. That's a little bit different because I think actually Tennessee's deep offense is pretty good right now. Tannehill's been great for them, whereas Mariota, they could barely move the ball. So you got to see where you're going. Like you might think Oakland has been down a little bit, and maybe you get an inflated number on Tennessee, so maybe wait it out a little bit. See if you can get a 3. Pittsburgh, the same thing. The Seattle and the Rams line is pretty interesting. I make the Rams around to pick them. So that was just, I think people think the Rams are just garbage now, where they're still pretty solid. I think people are definitely undervaluing the Rams, but the market spoke, and we're seeing a pick them here after Seattle of the Monday night game. So they're on a little bit of a short week. So. There's a bunch of different things.
I was going to say, I mean, we're starting to get down to that point in the season too. You mentioned about the injuries early on when we started talking here. This is week 14, if I'm not mistaken, of the NFL season. So we only got, less than a month left at this point. Yeah. And you're going to start seeing a few more of these guys just kind of sitting out if they're, banged up. I mean, again, I'm a big Jets fan. Starting to hear rumblings this week that maybe Jamal Adams isn't going to play. Yeah. And I can tell you that defense is already not that good. And if you're going to take the key piece, the best player, in my opinion, on that defense off of it, I can't imagine that's going to be all that great. Not that I'm really looking to get down on the Miami Dolphins, especially now that it's below a touchdown, but, things like that are going to change these lines. So we definitely have to make sure we keep an eye on it. Yep. So let me throw this out there for you. You want to throw out your favorite bet that you're still looking at right now at this moment before we sign off?
Yeah, so my favorite bet of the week's the Jags. I'm going against some early week line movement again. You can get them at a pretty low juice, +3. You can even get plus money. I've seen +103s, +100s out there. I make this just over 2. So, catching the field goal is pretty significant here. The Chargers, it's the Chargers. I don't know, if you're just going to play a close game every week. So this is going to come down to the wire. Jacksonville's at home. They don't get a huge home field advantage, but I just don't think the Chargers are this much better than the Jags. So, the Jags, between Minshew and Foles, there's not a huge difference there. I don't think they're either of them very good, but I'll put my faith in them. I think getting 3 at home for them is just too much. Should be a lower scoring game, so I'll take the field goal at home.
Yeah, and that's, talking about the Stanford Wong teasers, that's another one that, I already teased up when it went up to 2.5. I teased that up to 8.5 and, have that as part of my teaser. So I'm on board with you. Hopefully Jacksonville doesn't lose by a touchdown, and for your sake, doesn't lose by more than a field goal. And this way we all catch a couple bets here.
Yep.
So anyway, that's been another edition of the NFL opening line. Remember, you guys can still get over to EliteSportsBetting.com. We do still have I'm not 100% positive on this. It probably depends on when you're listening to this video. But we do still have the Black Friday sale going on right now. So type in code BLACK30 and you can save 30% off of any of our packages, whether it's sports betting, daily fantasy over at EliteFantasy.com or season-long fantasy over at, FantasyGuru.com, where, we have baseball coming up right now for any of you that are getting into it. So for Austin, I'm Benny, signing off. This has been another edition of The Opening Line at EliteSportsBetting.com.